There are men in this world whose names you don't say out loud in certain rooms, not because it's rude, because the walls have ears, and the ears belong to people who report back. Kieran Ashford was one of those men. He didn't walk into rooms. Rooms rearranged themselves around him. The air shifted. Conversations dropped half a register. Waitstaff found reasons to be somewhere else, or stayed very, very still, the way rabbits do when they sense something larger moving through the grass nearby. On a Thursday evening in early March, Kieran Ashford sat alone at a corner table in Morrow's, the kind of steakhouse where the lighting is low and the prices are not listed, and the maitre has been known to turn away sitting senators without so much as a blink. He had a glass of Barolo he hadn't touched. He had a folder of documents he wasn't reading. He had the particular stillness of a man who is accustomed to waiting for things to come to him rather than chasing anything down. He was 41 years old. He ran the Eastern Seaboard's most quietly efficient private empire. Import logistics on paper, everything else underneath. He had not raised his voice in public in 11 years. He had not needed to. What happened next was started by a little girl in a green raincoat. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you're new here, welcome to Sadie's Romance Library. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because this one is going to make your jaw drop, like if you love a good redemption story. Now, let's get into it. Her name was Bonnie Calloway. No, wait, stop. Let's back up further. Let's start with the girl whose night this actually was, because she matters more than anyone will realize until it's almost too late. Sarah Voss was 22 years old and had been a waitress at Morrow's for 14 months. She was good at it, the memory for orders, the ability to be present without being intrusive, the particular skill of reading a table in under 30 seconds and calibrating accordingly. She could tell by the way a man set his menu down whether he was going to tip well. She could tell by the way a woman touched her water glass whether the evening was going badly for her. She had not been planning to work the floor that Thursday. She was cross-covering for a colleague who'd called in sick, which meant she was handling 3 tables she didn't know, and wearing shoes that weren't her usual ones, and was already running 15 minutes behind on refills, when the door to the private dining alcove swung open and a child walked out alone. The child was maybe 5, maybe 6. She had dark curls that needed tending and a green raincoat that was soaked through at the hem, as though she'd been standing in a puddle not long ago. She was not crying, but she had the face of someone who had recently stopped. Sarah was passing with a bread basket. She stopped. "Hey," she said, going down to one knee right there in the middle of the floor. A busboy swerved around her. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" The little girl looked at her with enormous gray eyes and said, very seriously, "I can't find my uncle." "Okay." Sarah set the bread basket on the nearest empty chair without looking at it. "That's okay. What's your uncle's name?" The child considered this as though it were a trick question. "Uncle Kieran." Sarah didn't know that name. She didn't know it the way you don't know that the ocean is deep when you're standing on the shore. She just didn't know, and it didn't register as anything other than a name. "All right. And where did you last see him?" "He went to make a phone call." The girl pointed vaguely in the direction of the private hallway near the coat check. "He said 2 minutes. That was a lot of minutes ago." "It was," Sarah agreed very gently. "Okay, my name is Sarah. What's yours? Bonnie? Bonnie? Perfect. I love that name. Bonnie, are you hungry? Because I just got some really good bread from the kitchen." It was the right instinct. Bonnie's expression shifted from careful to cautiously interested. "What kind?" "The warm kind, with the butter that comes in the little dish." Bonnie thought about this. "Okay." Sarah led her to a small service alcove near the host stand, not visible from the main floor, quiet, with a low counter that Bonnie could lean against. She got the bread. She got the butter. She got a glass of water with a lemon wedge, because Bonnie pointed at the lemon on Sarah's own drink with transparent longing. And then she crouched next to Bonnie and said, "Can you tell me a little bit about your uncle? Does he work nearby? Did you come from somewhere else tonight?" "We came in the black car," Bonnie said with her mouth full. "Uncle Kieran always has the black car. Daddy says the black car means business, and the blue car means family. But tonight is both, so that's why I got to come." "That sounds important," Sarah said. "Uncle Kieran is very important," Bonnie said matter-of-factly. Daddy says not to say that to people, but it's true. Well, Sarah said, let's find him so he knows you're safe. Can I take your hand while we look? Bonnie put her small hand into Sarah's without hesitation, the way children do with people they've instinctively sorted into the safe column, and Sarah walked her back toward the private hallway, and that was the moment everything changed, though Sarah wouldn't know it for another 6 minutes. The private hallway at Morrow's was 3 degrees cooler than the rest of the restaurant, and 12 times more expensive to book. It was where the kind of conversations happened that didn't benefit from ambient noise. At the far end of it, Kieran Ashford was finishing a call that had taken considerably longer than 2 minutes, his back to the door, his voice so low that even in the silence of that hallway it was barely a murmur. He turned when he heard small footsteps. Bonnie launched herself at him with the kind of unguarded force that only children and golden retrievers manage without apology. He caught her, both arms automatic, the folder tucked under one arm gone without ceremony, and his expression, which had been the kind of controlled blankness that powerful men cultivate for public spaces, did something complicated. She found me at the host stand, Sarah said, from 3 feet back. She was trying very hard not to stare at the man holding this child, because the man holding this child was, well, he was something. Dark-suited, dark-eyed, with the kind of stillness that isn't calm so much as it is coiled, like a watch spring, like something that could move very fast when it chose to. She said she was looking for her uncle. I kept her with me until we could find you. He looked at her, not the quick, assessing glance that men in expensive suits usually gave service staff. Something longer, steadier, like he was reading a document for the second time to make sure he'd understood it correctly the first. Kieran Ashford, he said. Sarah Voss, she said, because it seemed like the natural response. She wasn't frightened? A little. She handled it well. Sarah smiled at Bonnie, who was now studying the buttons on Kieran Ashford's jacket with great concentration. Bread helped. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but in the vicinity. Thank you, he said. Part of the job. Sarah took a half step back. I'll leave you to your evening. She knows where I am if she needs anything. She was already turning when he said, What's your section tonight? She turned back. Tables 7 through 10, and the alcove, he nodded. Once. The way a man confirms coordinates on a map. She went back to the floor and told herself, the flutter in her chest was just the adrenaline of a small emergency successfully resolved. She was almost convincing. She should have had an uneventful rest of the evening. She almost did. Table 8 was a couple on what appeared to be a 3rd or 4th date, comfortable enough to share dishes, not comfortable enough to finish each other's sentences. Table 9 was a party of 6 celebrating something, ordered 2 bottles of wine before the appetizers arrived, were going to be her best tip of the night. Table 10 walked in at 7:40 and immediately made the back of Sarah's neck prickle. There were 2 of them. A man in his mid-40s in a suit that was flashier than the room warranted. Pocket square cufflinks that caught the light like small advertisements for his own importance. And a woman a decade younger who was beautiful in the strained way of someone who had learned to hold herself very carefully. The man had already been talking when they sat down. The woman was listening with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that interrupting is more expensive than patience. Sarah took their drinks order, standard. She brought the drinks, standard. She came back to take their food order, and the man, who had introduced himself to no one, but whose voice, carried as though he expected the room to lean in, was in the middle of something. Already told your mother this isn't negotiable. The job at Hollis & Crane is a gift, and you turning it down because of some idea you have about your little craft business. It's not a little craft business, Dad, the woman said very quietly. I have 17 wholesale accounts. 17. He said it the way you'd say 17 ants at a picnic. That's adorable. That's genuinely adorable. You know what Hollis & Crane pays their junior partners in year 1? Because I can write the number down if 17 sounds big to you. Sarah had materialized at the table's edge. Professional training meant her face was neutral. Her grip on her order pad was not. Ready to order? She said. The man, she'd learned from the reservation, his name was Crawford Finley, looked at her with the specific expression of someone for whom service staff exist as furniture that occasionally speaks. "We'll need a few more minutes," he said, and went back to his daughter. "The point I'm making, Audra, is that your mother and I have been very patient." "Mr. Finley," Sarah said. She did not know why she said it, only that Audra Finley was gripping her water glass so hard her knuckles were pale, and that the table of 6 on her left had gone slightly quieter, and that something in Sarah that was normally very well behaved had reached a quiet limit. "Could I suggest the sea base this evening? It's exceptional. Chef's been doing something new with the lemon beurre blanc." Crawford Finley looked at her, then at his daughter, then back at Sarah, with the expression of a man who has just been mildly interrupted by a piece of furniture and cannot decide how to feel about it. "I said we'd need a minute," he said, his voice dropping into something with edges. "Of course," Sarah said. She smiled pleasantly. She stepped back. She was at the service station when she heard his voice rise, not to a shout, not quite, but to the register that carries in restaurants, the one that makes nearby tables pretend very hard to be absorbed in their own conversations. "Embarrassing, frankly, Audra. The idea that you think some hobby, and I'm not going to apologize for calling it that, is worth throwing away the kind of opportunity that I have had to fight for every single day of my dad. You want to be a waitress your whole life? Is that no? Answer me. Is that what you want? Because from where I'm standing, that's the trajectory." Sarah had turned around. She was not going to say anything. That was not the plan. The plan was to refresh the water on table 7, let the manager handle it if it escalated, protect her job, protect her tips, keep her head down. She crossed the floor and set the water pitcher on the table with a small, precise click and said, "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." Crawford Finley turned to her slowly. He had the look of a man who was not often asked to do things. "I beg your pardon?" "Lower your voice," Sarah said. "You're disturbing the other guests." "I'm speaking to my daughter." "You're speaking at her," Sarah said, "in a room full of people, and you're doing it loudly enough that I've had 2 other tables signal me in the last 3 minutes. So I'm asking you, respectfully, to bring it down." The silence that followed had a particular quality. The table of 6 was no longer even pretending. The couple on their 3rd or 4th date had gone very still. Somewhere behind Sarah, she heard the approach of her manager, Graham, who was going to be approximately furious with her. What she did not hear, what she could not have known to listen for, was the quiet, steady sound of someone setting down a fork. Crawford Finley stood up. He was tall when he stood, and he clearly knew it, and he used it the way men sometimes use size, as punctuation. "Do you know," he said, "who I am? You're a guest of this restaurant," Sarah said evenly, "and I'm asking you to respect the other guests. My family," he said, "has held a private account at this establishment for 22 years. 22 years. I have had 3 partners from this firm celebrate their retirements in this room. I have." He was working himself up now, the pocket square trembling slightly with the force of his own self-importance. "I have personally recommended this restaurant to more clients than you have probably served in your entire—" Crawford, the room didn't go quiet. It had already been quiet, but the quality of the silence changed. The voice that had said Crawford Finley's first name came from behind and to the left of Sarah. It was not loud. It was, if anything, conversational. The kind of voice you use when you're telling someone something they should already know. Crawford Finley turned, and turned pale. Not fast. Gradually, the way morning comes except in reverse, the light going out of him, the certainty draining away. His mouth, which had been open, closed. He opened it again. Nothing came out. Kieran Ashford stood 2 tables away with his jacket buttoned and his hands loose at his sides, and Bonnie's small hand in his left one, and he looked at Crawford Finley the way a man looks at a math problem he's already solved. "Sit down," Kieran Ashford said. Crawford Finley sat down. It happened that fast. 1 sentence. No threat in it, not technically, not anything you could point to. Just the weight of the man saying it, and some animal instinct in Crawford Finley that had apparently survived his years of pocket squares and private accounts, that recognized, in the most fundamental way, that whatever room he occupied in the hierarchy of things, this man was not below him on it. Bonnie looked up at Kieran. "Is he in trouble?" she asked, at a child's volume, which is to say at a volume audible to most of the dining room. He's going to be fine, Kieran said. He was being mean to that lady. I know, Kieran said. He's going to apologize. He looked at Crawford Finley when he said that last part, not as a suggestion. Crawford Finley looked at Sarah. He looked the way men look when they have remembered, suddenly and inconveniently, that there are things in the world larger than themselves. He cleared his throat. I apologize. For raising my voice, it was not a gracious apology. But it was an apology, and it had been extracted by the specific gravity of Kieran Ashford's presence, and every single person in the room had witnessed it, and Sarah could feel the strange, doubled sensation of wanting to laugh and wanting to cry and doing neither. Thank you, she said, to Crawford Finley. Then she picked up the water pitcher and went to table 7 and refilled the glasses with completely steady hands, which was more self-possession than she actually felt, and she did not look at the corner table where Kieran Ashford was resettling Bonnie into her seat and picking up the fork he'd set down. Graham, her manager, appeared at her elbow 3 seconds later, vibrating quietly. Sarah, he said. I know, she said. I know, Graham. He made a sound, several sounds. Then he went away, because table 9 was signaling for the wine list, and the night had to continue, and also because Graham had been in the restaurant business for 19 years and had a finely developed instinct for moments that were over. Audra Finley caught her near the service station at 8:30. She was perhaps 28, and she had the look of someone who had recently remembered they were allowed to breathe. I just wanted to. I mean, I know you didn't have to do that, she said. You probably shouldn't have done that. But she stopped. Started again. Thank you, that's all. Just thank you. Are you okay? Sarah asked. Audra laughed a little unevenly. I don't know, not totally. But, she looked across the room to where her father was sitting in silence, looking at his steak, looking like a man who has recently been reminded of his place in the universe. Better than I was an hour ago. She squeezed Sarah's arm once, quickly, and went back to the table. The rest of the shift passed in the ordinary way of things. The 6 top finished their wine and left a tip that made Sarah's night. The couple on their 3rd date split the check carefully and left holding hands. Crawford Finley ate in silence and left without ordering dessert and without looking at Sarah at all, and Audra Finley tucked a folded piece of paper under the edge of her side plate when they left, which turned out to be her business card with thank you written on the back in small, precise handwriting. Kieran Ashford's table received its check last. Sarah brought it herself because it was her section and because she was not the kind of person who shied away from things after they'd happened. She set it on the table, smiled, said the usual things about hoping the evening had been enjoyable, turned to go. Miss Voss. She turned back. Bonnie was asleep, genuinely, completely asleep, with her head on Kieran Ashford's arm and her green raincoat folded under her cheek like a pillow, and he was not moving, not shifting to relocate her, just sitting very still with a child asleep against him and his dark eyes on Sarah. Sir, she said. What you did earlier, he said. With Finley, I overstepped, she said, because she'd had time to think about it, and that was the accurate assessment. You didn't, he said. She looked at him. You saw something happening, he said. You did something about it, in a room full of people who were choosing not to. He paused. I've found that's rarer than most people like to believe. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, Bonnie's good at sleeping anywhere. Something happened in his face again, that thing that wasn't a smile but lived next door to one. Her father's the same way. Drives me insane at board meetings. Her father's your brother. My younger brother, yes. He's currently in a meeting of his own that couldn't be rescheduled. Hence, he glanced down at Bonnie. The impromptu dinner arrangement. She's wonderful, Sarah said, and meant it. She's terrifying, he said. She's 5 and she's already better at reading people than most of my lieutenants. He said the word lieutenants without any particular emphasis. The way you say a word when you've used it a certain way for a long time and it stopped sounding unusual to you. Sarah heard it, filed it somewhere she didn't examine yet. The bread helped, she said. I know, she told me. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, smooth, unhurried, and took out a card, plain, black. Just a phone number and the initials KA engraved in the center. He set it on the table beside the check folder. If you ever need anything, he said, for any reason, Sarah looked at the card, looked at him. "That's a very large offer," she said carefully. "From someone I just met. You kept a lost child calm and fed and safe until she found her family," he said. "And then you stood up in a room full of people who were all looking away, and you said the thing no one else was willing to say. That's not nothing, Miss Voss. People in my world build careers on less." She picked up the card. She didn't know why she did it. Only that something in the steady certainty of his voice had lodged under her ribs like a splinter, not painful, just present. There, a small persistent thing. "Good night, Mr. Ashford," she said. "Good night, Miss Voss," he said. "Get home safe." She pocketed the card and went to the back and changed out of her work shoes and got her coat, and did not take the card back out until she was 3 blocks away, walking to the train, the March air cold enough to make her eyes water. Just a number, just initials, just the weight of it in her hand, which was heavier than a card had any right to be. She put it back in her pocket. She kept walking. Above the city, the clouds were breaking up, and between them she could see 2 or 3 stars, and the lights of a plane crossing somewhere high and silent overhead. She had stood up in a room full of people looking away, and a man whose name made rooms go quiet had noticed. She had no idea, on that cold March evening, with the card in her pocket and the train 4 minutes out, what noticing meant when Kieran Ashford was the one doing it. She would find out. What she found out first was that Crawford Finley had a longer memory than she'd credited him with. Monday morning, before her Tuesday evening shift, Graham called. His voice had the specific flatness of a man delivering news he'd already rehearsed. "Sarah, Crawford Finley's office contacted the restaurant this morning. He's made a complaint. About Thursday." She sat on the edge of her bed. "I know this isn't. I want you to know I told them it was handled appropriately," Graham said, in the tone of someone who'd said something softer than the truth. "But his account relationship with the restaurant it's significant, Sarah. The owners have asked me to." He stopped, started again. "We're going to have to let you go." She said nothing for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "I'm sorry," Graham said. "I know," she said. She hung up. She sat for a moment. The March light was coming through her window at a long, pale angle, and she thought, with the calm clarity of shock, that she didn't know how she was going to cover rent. She'd been saving for 14 months, and she had something, but not enough. She had 3 other applications out with other restaurants, but nothing confirmed. She had Audra Finley's card on her desk with "thank you" on the back. She had a plain black card with a number and the initials KA. She sat for a long time not touching it. Then she thought about Crawford Finley's face when Kieran Ashford said "sit down," and about Audra's knuckles, white against the water glass, and about Bonnie asleep against a black-suited arm in a corner of a restaurant that cost more than Sierra's monthly rent per table. She picked up the card. She told herself she was just going to see if it was even a real number, It rang once, then Miss Voss, no greeting, just her name, like he'd been expecting the call, or like he'd known the number on sight, or like Kieran Ashford simply didn't waste time on standard social conventions when he already knew what was happening. "How did you?" she started. "Your number was on the staff contact list when I made the reservation," he said. "I had it noted, in case." A pause. "What's happened?" she told him, briefly. She was not going to cry. She would not allow herself to cry. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that had the quality of a decision being made. Not uncertainty, not deliberation, just the moment between the decision and the action. "Come to this address at 2 o'clock, he said, and gave her an address in the West 60s. "I'm not looking for," she started. "I know what you're looking for," he said. "You're looking for work that doesn't evaporate the first time you do the right thing. Come at 2. He hung up before she could answer. She went at 2. The address was a building that didn't advertise itself. Glass and stone, a doorman who had the look of a man who'd retired from something more physical. She gave her name. She was expected. The office on the 14th floor was not what she'd anticipated, which was foolish, she realized, because she hadn't really thought through what she'd anticipated. She'd expected dark wood maybe, a power aesthetic. Instead it was mostly windows, and a desk that was covered in actual work, not staged work, and on a small side table near the window, an evidence of childhood, a drawing of a cat, clearly by a very young hand, tucked into the corner of the window frame. Kieran Ashford was on the phone when she arrived. He held up one finger, not rudely, just efficiently, and finished the call in under 40 seconds and hung up. "Sit down," he said, and this time it was not the voice he'd used with Crawford Finley. It was just a request. She sat. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to hear the whole thing before you react." She nodded. "I have a household," he said, "large enough to require someone to manage it. Staff scheduling, supply management, correspondence, handling arrangements. It's effectively a full-time operations role. It pays more than the restaurant. It requires someone who is observant, discreet, and calm in unexpected situations." He paused. "You're qualified on all 3 counts from what I observed last Thursday." She looked at him. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes." "As household manager?" "Yes." "For you?" "Yes." She absorbed this. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully, "I don't know anything about you. Beyond Thursday night." "I know," he said, "so ask." She looked at him. He looked back, and there was nothing evasive in it, nothing that suggested the offer was anything other than what he'd said it was. There was only that steadiness, the same steadiness she'd noticed across a crowded restaurant 3 days ago. "Who are you?" she said. "Actually. Not the card. Not the table. Who are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I run a number of enterprises, some of which are entirely legitimate, and some of which operate in areas that governments prefer not to examine too closely. I am not a good man by most conventional definitions. I am not a dangerous man to people who don't make themselves my concern. You made yourself my concern on Thursday, in the best possible way, by taking care of someone I love." He paused. "I don't offer things I don't mean, Miss Voss, and I don't forget what I owe." Sarah Voss sat in a 14th floor office, looking at a man who had just told her, in the clearest possible terms, that he was a criminal and that she had a debt he intended to repay, and that she could either accept or walk out the door and go back to filing restaurant applications in a city where Crawford Finley had a 22-year account relationship and a long memory. She thought about Bonnie's hand in hers. She thought about the warm bread and the lemon in the water glass, and the way Bonnie had said, "Uncle Kieran is very important," with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who simply reports the world as it is. She thought about standing in a room full of people who were looking away and deciding to do something anyway. "Okay," she said. He blinked, just once, and she realized with a small private satisfaction that she had surprised him. "Okay," he repeated. "I want the job description in writing," she said. "I want to know what I'm actually managing. I want 1 week to decide if it's working. And I need—" She named a number which was more than she'd made at Morrow's and less than she suspected he'd expected her to ask for. He looked at her, the not quite a smile. "Closer this time." "Done," he said. "All of it. And," she said, "if Crawford Finley ever tries to do that to someone else's daughter in my presence again, I'm going to say something, just so you know." Something changed in his face. It was not the not smile anymore. It was something realer, something that lived deeper, the expression of a man who has seen a great many things and learned to expect very little, encountering something he had not expected, something small and particular and absolutely certain of itself. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Kieran Ashford said. She started on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. By the end of the first week, she had restructured his household calendar, solved a recurring issue with the supply vendor, and persuaded Bonnie, who arrived for an impromptu visit on Friday afternoon, to eat something other than plain bread for lunch. She had also, without planning to, learned the geography of the man she worked for. The way he went very still before a decision, and moved quickly once it was made. The way he read things twice. The way he stood at the window in the late afternoon, with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and his hands behind his back, and looked out at the city, as though he was taking it seriously. She had not expected to like him. She had expected to find him frightening, or impressive in the cold way of powerful things, or simply difficult to read. She had not expected the drawing of Bonnie's cat, or the way he remembered her preferences for how she took her coffee, or the evening he came back from a meeting that had clearly gone badly and said, without preamble, "Bonnie asked me to give you this," and handed her a folded piece of paper that turned out to be another drawing, this one of 2 figures, one tall and dark-suited, one shorter with yellow hair, labeled in uneven capital letters, Uncle K and Sarah. She kept it. Of course she kept it. And that's where I'm going to pause for a second, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Sarah girl, you know who this man is, you know what he does, and you're keeping children's drawings. And you know what, you're not wrong. But sometimes the world doesn't fit into the boxes we build for it. Sometimes the man who makes rooms go quiet is the same one who sits completely still so a 5-year-old can sleep against his arm. Sometimes the person who sees you, really sees you, not your job title, not your usefulness, not what you can do for them, shows up somewhere you never expected. If this story is hitting you somewhere, drop a comment below and tell me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. We're just getting to the good part. The good part came 6 weeks in, on a night in mid-April, when the city was doing that thing it does in spring, where the warmth comes not all at once but in moments. A patch of sunlight here, a windless corner there, like it's testing whether you're paying attention. She was locking up the office after a late session with the vendor invoices. He was still there, which was not unusual. He was often still there at 9, at 10, occasionally at midnight. What was unusual was that he was not working. He was sitting at his desk with his hands flat on it and his eyes on the middle distance. And when she said goodnight from the doorway, he said, "Stay a moment." And the quality of his voice was different enough that she came back in and sat down. "Finley's lawyer contacted my legal team today," he said. She went still. "He's filed a complaint against the restaurant on an unrelated matter. A tactic." He said the word without inflection. "He's also made certain inquiries about you, about your current employment situation." She felt the cold move through her, slow and clear. "He's trying to. He wants you to understand," Kieran said, "that his reach extends past the restaurant industry. He's under a particular impression about what that means." "What impression?" "That it will frighten you." He looked at her steadily. "Will it?" She thought about what she knew now, 6 weeks in, about Kieran Ashford and the things that moved at the edges of his world, quiet and exact and final. She thought about how Crawford Finley's pale face had drained of itself at the sound of one voice. "No," she said. He nodded, once, as though she'd confirmed something he'd already known. "I want you to hear something," he said, and his voice shifted into the register she now associated with things he meant completely. "What I said 6 weeks ago, that I don't forget what I owe, that holds. But what I'm saying now is different." He paused, and in the pause she could feel the weight of a man who does not say unnecessary things preparing to say something necessary. "Finley will not reach you, not your job, not your apartment, not any part of your life. Not because I owe you, I've repaid that many times over by now if we're keeping score, but because you are under my protection. Because I choose to protect what I value." The room was quiet. Outside the windows, the city went on being the city, lights and distance, and the low constant sound of a million lives in motion. "You value me," she said carefully. "Yes," he said. Simple, final, not a question, not an offer, not a trial balloon. Just a fact delivered the way he delivered all facts, without apology or decoration. She looked at him. She looked at the window with the city behind it. She looked at the corner of the window frame where Bonnie's drawing of a cat was still tucked. "Kieran," she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. She watched him hear it, watched something in him register it, the way you register the moment a room's temperature changes. "I need you to understand something too," she said. "I didn't take this job because I was frightened of what came next. I took it because you were honest with me, because you told me exactly what you were and let me decide." She paused. "I'm still deciding, all of it, every day, and I'm still here." He looked at her across the desk with the city lights behind him, and the late hour around them, and the drawing of a cat in the corner, and what happened in his face was not the not smile this time. It was something that had the weight of everything he didn't usually let show, the man behind the stillness, the person under the gravity, everything he kept contained and controlled and directed outward in the service of an empire. "Sarah," he said, and that was all. Just her name, in his voice, in that room, and it was enough. She did not go home that night right away. They stayed and talked, not about work, not about Finley, not about anything that required decisions. They talked the way people talk when they have discovered, to their mutual surprise, that the other person is genuinely interesting. He told her about his brother, who was constitutionally incapable of being on time to anything, and yet had somehow built a hedge fund that operated on precise 1-second intervals. She told him about the town she'd grown up in, where the horizon was flat all the way to the edge of the world, and how she'd never quite believed in walls until she moved to New York and found herself surrounded by them. He listened the way he did everything, with his whole attention, nothing withheld. At 11:15, she put on her coat and picked up her bag, and he walked her to the elevator, which was not something he did, and when the elevator arrived, he held the door a beat longer than necessary and looked at her. "The drawing Bonnie gave you," he said. "The one of the two figures?" "Yes," she said. "She asked me if you were going to stay," he said. "Last time she was here, I told her I didn't know." She held his gaze. "What would you tell her now?" He was quiet for a moment. The elevator hummed. "I'd tell her," he said, "that some things don't need deciding anymore." The elevator doors closed. She pressed the lobby button. She stood in the small lit box of the elevator with her heart doing something irregular, and her coat still open and the memory of his face, and she did what she'd done on a cold March evening, with a plain black card in her pocket. She decided to see. "So, do you believe in the idea that the right people find each other, even in the wrong circumstances? Even when one of them is a waitress who shouldn't have said anything, and the other one is a man whose name clears a room?" Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to know what happens when Crawford Finley figures out exactly who Sarah works for now, like this video and subscribe, because that story's coming. And it is going to be worth the wait. This has been Sadie's Romance Library. I'll see you in the next one.